So, am I cheating? I mean, the next major Zelda release after Majora's Mask is The Wind Waker, right? I don't know, but I like doing a series in proper order, so we're covering the Game Boy Color duology today. The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons and The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Ages. They were released for the Game Boy Color in 2001, just a year after Majora's Mask was released. So this game was a swan song for the Game Boy Color before the Game Boy Advance was released. It was released just a month before the GBA's release in North America. The development of the games was not handled by Nintendo, but by a third-party publisher. Capcom would be the ones to take the reins this time. Capcom producer, forgive me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, Yoshiki Okamoto approached Shigeru Miyamoto with the idea of remaking the original Legend of Zelda for the Game Boy Color. The plan was to do the remake and then do a new game that would expand on the Zelda formula. However, the creative team disagreed. They wanted to do a new Zelda game right away, but remnants of the original plan remained in the infrastructure. However, the Game Boy's narrow screen caused problems. The game was proving to be ambitious for the Game Boy Color to handle, so the team sought Miyamoto's guidance, and he came up with the idea of splitting the story across 3 games. They would come to be known as Mystical Seed of Power, Mystical Seed of Wisdom, and Mystical Seed of Courage. However, as time went on, it became apparent that 3 games was far too complex for the team to handle. Indeed, as there would be no less than 6 different ways to play the games to form a complete narrative. So the 3rd game was scrapped and it was changed to 2 games, Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons. The Game Boy Color was the first system to make use of a link cable, as Pokemon had popularized just a few years earlier. So the story of the Oracle game started off with Link approaching the Triforce. Hyrule Historia claims that these games are interquels set in between A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening. Hyrule Encyclopedia says it's a distant sequel to Link's Awakening. Zelda.com says it's a direct sequel to Link's Awakening, so in regards to that, I don't really care. The games are clearly meant to stand on their own without being directly tied into another Zelda. Link gets sent to 2 lands depending on the game: Holdrum in Seasons, Labrina in Ages. In both games, Link meets an Oracle: Din, the Oracle of Seasons, and Nehru, the Oracle of Ages. Yeah, the fact that they share the same names as the goddesses of Hyrule is not a coincidence. However, in both cases, said Oracle is kidnapped by whichever game's bad guy. Onyx in Seasons, Varin in Ages, which throws either the seasons or time stream out of order, and Link has to go put things back in order. Oh, and in Ages you have to deal with Nehru's friend Ralph, who's trying to one-up you by rescuing Nehru before you can. What a guy. Just like the original Zelda, Link must obtain 8 MacGuffins to be able to access the final area, either the Essences of Nature or Essences of Time. Because this is again a Game Boy game, we are back to only having 2 buttons to be able to use, which means that once again your sword is a button you have to assign it to. Now don't get me wrong, I understand why this is done. Have to make do with what you have with limited technology. I noticed that the game reuses a lot of assets from Link's Awakening. No doubt as a cost-saving maneuver. Lots of games do that. Majora's Mask reused Ocarina of Time's original assets. All the groundwork was already laid out in Link's Awakening for how to do a portable Zelda, so it made sense to copy it. The first dungeon in Seasons is the Gnarled Root Dungeon, a pretty standard opening dungeon. In this dungeon you get the Seed Satchel, which are going to be very important in your journey in both games. The mini-boss is just a standard red and blue moblin. The dungeon is mainly reminiscent of Zelda 1 and is fairly simple in terms of puzzles and enemies. Even the boss, Aquamentus, is basically the same boss from Zelda 1, except expanded upon much greatly, because here's how he looked in Zelda 1, and compare that to here, you can see the graphical jump. Pretty impressive. The first dungeon in Ages, Spirit's Grave, is largely the same. A fairly simple dungeon designed to get you used to the game. I played this game second as the Link game, so when I got the power bracelet in this dungeon I was a little confused. I already had this in Seasons. The only item that was carried over was the sword. Why couldn't I keep the items that I already had? Well, because that would disrupt and break the other game, so that's why. But at least let me keep the items that are in both games. More on that later. The mini-boss is a giant guinea, but the main boss, Pumpkinhead, is actually quite original, since after you slash the body, you have to pick up the head and then slash the spirit with your sword. Rinse and repeat, and you got it. After that dungeon, I'll talk about the Overworlds. If you're not exploring Hyrule this time, Holdrum and Labrina are structured very similarly. In both games, it's about taking advantage of whatever game's gimmick. You use the Rod of Seasons to manipulate the seasons to your advantage in seasons, and in Ages you use the Harp of Ages to travel back between past and present. Yeah, we're doing time travel again like we did in Ocarina of Time. Not the last time we'll be doing time travel. One reoccurring thing I noticed is that you'll always run into this girl named Maple, who if you bump into her, you'll cause items to go flying everywhere, and it's up to you to get more items than her. One of the most annoying things is trying to get her to drop a piece of heart because it's totally random when she will. More on that another time. What Seasons has that Ages doesn't is its own sub-area, Subrosia, where Subrosians live. It has its own currency, which is very interesting. The main purpose of coming here is to power up the Rod of Seasons with the 4 seasons. Ages, however, changes the landscape of the towns by going back in time. By using the harp to warp, you could be ending up in a completely different location. It changes things up a little, whereas in Seasons there are certain locations that can't be accessed unless you are in the right season, meaning you have to go find a stump and wave the Rod of Seasons to change it. Traveling across the world can take a while, but that's where the Gale Seeds come in. You have 5 types of seeds. The Pegasus Seeds serve the same purpose as the Pegasus Boost by making you move faster. The Gale Seeds will warp you to any seed tree, making traveling much easier. Of course, in Ages, certain trees are only available depending on what era you're in. The second dungeon in Seasons is the Snake's Remains, and as you can imagine, it's highly inhabited with ropes. Why are the snakes called ropes in this series? I've always wondered that. The dungeon is pretty short. You get the power bracelet in this dungeon, and the main boss is Facade. Yeah, the guy from Link's Awakening. If this is an integral, maybe that explains why he's in Link's Awakening, as someone that Link remembers. And the second boss is Dodongo. See what I mean about the original plan of the remake remaining in the infrastructure? Of course, this time you have to pick the Dodongo up and throw him onto the bed of spikes. The second dungeon in Ages is the Wind Dungeon, and it's here you get the Rock Feather. Yep, the Rock Feather, because Link can't jump naturally, he has to have an item to do it. This is the first dungeon that you have to travel into the past to get to. It's very interesting. The dungeon collapses in the present, so you have to go back to the past. The mini-boss Swoop is a red demon that flies around. Nothing too noteworthy, but the boss Head Flump was really annoying because you have to throw a bomb into his head when it's red, otherwise it won't be damaged. What's annoying is that when you die, you get thrown all the way back to the beginning of the dungeon. Now that's standard, I suppose, but just annoying. Before I talk about the third dungeons, let's real quick talk about the various partner buddies that Link can find. You can meet all 3, but only one can be your partner. Moosh is good for levitating across bottomless pits by rapidly tapping the A button. Ricky the Kangaroo is a boxing kangaroo, so he can hop anywhere, and he seriously hates Tinkle, so that's a plus in my book. Dimitri the friendly Dodongo is good for traversing the sea. Whoever you pick is up to you, but it doesn't impact the game. The third dungeon in Seasons is Poison Moth Slayer, but it took quite a long time to get here. It's a fitting location in the middle of Spoof Swamp. The dungeon mainly serves to introduce you to the platforming segments, so you get Rock's Feather here. The mini-bosses, the Umiya, how do you say this, are kind of annoying because you have to pick them up out of the water and then hurt them. The boss, Mothula, is annoying because if you fall down the pit, you have to restart the battle all over again, but it's a nice little athletic battle. Before you even get to the third dungeon in Ages, you get stuck on Crescent Island and lose all your items, so you have to go back and find them. How annoying, having to go back and buy my own items. This is the first time I think a Zelda game has done this, and I think Skyward Sword did something just like this. Moonlit Grotto is very similar to Eagle Tower from Link's Awakening because you have to collapse part of the dungeon to progress. The item, the Seed Shooter, is pretty cool as it lets Link shoot out seeds and you can shoot in 8 directions. Very nice. The mini-boss Sub-Terror isn't too noteworthy, although it makes practical use of the shovel. The boss Shadow Hag is interesting because it makes use of the Seed Shooter in a clever way. Before you even go to the next dungeon, in a Link game, this is where you meet Princess Zelda. See, she gets herself into trouble and you have to go save her. Ages has a nice little nod to Donkey Kong. Yep, just like Donkey Kong, you have to go up and save her. Apparently she's the same Zelda from A Link to the Past, which is a little confusing because it seems like they meet for the first time, so yeah. Either way, Zelda plays a minor role in the plot until the very end. One little touch I noticed is that in both games you encounter the Moblin King, and depending on which game you play second, he'll remember you. It's always satisfying to give this creep his just desserts. Of course, fighting him isn't particularly hard since it just involves shooting the bombs back at him. A rather nice bit of continuity. The fourth dungeon, Dancing Dragon in Seasons, is located on Mount Cuckoo. The dungeon is riddled with minecarts, so you're going to be traveling through them a lot. The mini-boss looks a lot like a Gainem, although he's not him, but he's very similar. Maybe this explains why Link encounters the dream version of him before. In this dungeon, you get the slingshot, which is the same thing as the seed shooter. The boss Goma is pretty much what you'd expect. It's Goma, pretty much one of the most standard Zelda boss fights. For ages, the fourth dungeon is the Skull Dungeon. Like Dancing Dragon, this dungeon is filled with minecarts, but it has one of the coolest takes on the hookshot I've seen. The switch hook, which lets you switch places with an object. Yeah, it's a variation on the hookshot, but one that I like a lot. The mini-boss, Arma's Warrior, has an interesting attack pattern, as you have to use his own sword against him. The boss, Eyesore, is pretty fun as it makes creative use of the switch hook. Switching places with it and hacking away, yeah, that's how I like it. In Seasons, the fifth dungeon is Unicorn's Cave, which requires getting the Season of Autumn into your Rod of Seasons. The Unicorn's Cave is most notable for introducing you to the magnetic gloves, which allow Link to home in on magnetic balls either north or south. The mini-boss Slagger is really annoying because you have to keep hitting its tail. The boss Digdogger is so annoying because you have to deal with the magnetic spike ball, but you can't pick the ball up. You just have to hope that the boss will fall into its path, and he splits into minis and you have to destroy them too. Just a really annoying boss. In Ages, the fifth dungeon is the Crown Dungeon, and it brings back the Cane of Samara, which means that you're going to find a lot of puzzles around creating blocks on switches. The mini-boss is yet another repeat encounter with Smasher. It is basically the exact same boss. The boss Smog is a puzzle boss since you have to use the Cane of Samara to get the mini-Smogs back together into one so you can damage him. It's an interesting, if sometimes frustrating, idea. The sixth dungeon in Seasons is the Ancient Ruins, which looks a lot like Eagle Tower from Link's Awakening. You get the magic boomerang, which unlike its original counterpart can be controlled after you release it. Mini-boss is Vyre again. But the main boss, Manhandla, is one of the most annoying encounters in all of Zelda because you have to destroy the four heads and the mouths will never be open if you are facing them. That's not even the end of it, as you have to destroy the body. So annoying. The sixth dungeon in Ages is Mermaids Cave, and it's the only dungeon in Ages that takes advantage of the past and present concept. The item, the Mermaid's Suit, is one of the most annoying mechanics in a Zelda game. It lets you swim much faster than underwater, but you have to constantly mash the D-pad button instead of the A button. Not sure why that is. My thumb started to hurt. Mini-boss is Vyre again for the last time. The boss, Autogon, actually makes clever use of the Mermaid Suit and the Seed Shooter. Now to Dungeon 7 in Seasons. It's the Explorer's Crypt, a very dimly lit location. You have to get to the pirate ship to take you to it, a reoccurring thing in the Oracle games. The item is the Rock's Cape, which gives Link a glide, which can be rather annoying because sometimes I press the button in the side-scrolling sections but nothing will come out. The mini-boss is the Poe sisters who are encountered early on. The boss is Gleeok, another Zelda 1 boss, and he's fought pretty much the same way. Dungeon number 7 in Ages is Jobys Belly. I must admit I do like how the sea accounts for the mermaid suit ability, giving you whole landscape while you're underwater, but this dungeon brings back memories of the water temple of Ocarina of Time, and not in a good way. The mini-boss is again another repeat against the anglerfish. The boss, Plasmarine, is interesting because you have to switch places with it to change its color. It can only be harmed by its own attacks. It's a good way to do the Zelda formula. Before I move on, I should note that Ages has more of an individual plot going on than Seasons does. Being that Seasons was planned as a remake of Zelda 1, the bare bones plot makes a lot of sense when taking that into regard. In Ages, you get the opportunity to rescue Nehru from Varan at this moment, and you basically go Metal Gear Solid into the castle. One touch I like is that the soldiers don't disappear when you beat them, they just hop away. You can't kill them, that would cause time paradoxes. The boss fight, again, is making creative use of the switch hook, and I really do like that. Before I cover the final dungeons, let me talk real quick about the Link capability. The password system is really ridiculous with so many letters. So many letters and symbols. Easy to forget, but that's where Furore comes into play. Yeah, the goddess of Link's virtue is just an extra for you to jot down your secrets to. Kinda degrading in a way. But it works. You go to a character in the previous game, tell them the password, you get an item in the other game. Then you go to Furore and you type the password there and you get it in your linked game. This is how you get the Master Sword and Mirror Shield. It's a very great way to tie the games together. The final dungeon for Seasons is the Sword and Shield Maze. It's the only dungeon in Subrosia. In this dungeon you get the Hyper Slingshot, which lets you fire 3 seeds at the cost of 1. How novel. The boss, Frypower, is actually kind of an interesting foreshadowing to the real villain of the game since you have to damage him with his own attacks. The Medusa head is, well, about the same. Nothing too noteworthy. The final dungeon for Ages is the Ancient Tomb, a haunting, narrow location. The item is the Power Glove. No, not that one. This one just lets you pick up bigger statues, which is not particularly interesting. The mini-boss with the blue staff was another game of tennis. Man, Zelda loves these kind of bosses. The boss, Ramrock, is very creative as you go through several forms with different ways to damage him. Now for the final showdown with the villains. You see, the plot for both games becomes much stronger when you tie them together, as it becomes clear that Twinrova seeks to resurrect Ganon. Nice little bit of continuity. General Onyx is not particularly hard, but I do enjoy using the Rod of Seasons to bat Din away so you can damage him. It's a nice way of making practical use of the thing, and the main boss battle is really huge. Kinda reminds me of the final Signiform in Mega Man X. Gotta jump on his hands and strike his head. The final boss in Ages is interrupted by Ralph, who, despite Queen Ambi being his ancestor, is going to kill her anyway, despite her being an innocent. Nice thinking, Ralph. So Veron is fought the same way. You beat her out of Ambi. Her true form is very, very annoying to fight, and she brought me down to low health. Her final form was actually kind of intimidating because I was down to very little health, but because I had the Master Sword, I was able to beat her pretty handily. But now the story finally reaches its apex as Zelda is captured to serve as the final sacrifice, and with both oracles backing him up, Link sets out to rescue her. The final section is a bit of a puzzle and it took me a few tries. The boss battles with the witches and Twinrova are pretty much the same as their Ocarina of Time counterpart, just on a 2D plane. I'm not sure why she's weak to the sense seed of all things, but she decides to sacrifice herself. Yeah, rather than being the intelligent schemer, Ganon is instead a mindless beast who wants nothing but destruction. Actually, the first time that take on him was used. Ganon's not particularly tough since, well, he is a mindless beast, he's not thinking straight. Once you beat him, he regains a bit of clarity. So all in all, it's a happy ending. So that's The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons and Ages, and how do I think they fare? I think they're quite good. They're very unique because unlike most other Zeldas that stand on their own, you have to play these games as a pair to understand the full story. I think the linked game aspect really makes these games stand on their own as a part of the Zelda legend. Will these games get the remake treatment next, like Link's Awakening will be receiving in a few months as of the time of this video? Who knows? But all in all, I recommend giving these games a try. They are worthy additions to the Zelda mythos.